Imagine a man who spent his whole life chasing stones and ancient history. One day, in the burning heart of the desert, he uncovers a lost city where every crumbling wall whispers only one name: Allah. The silence of that forgotten city speaks louder than words, asking him, "Are you listening?" And under the blanket of 1,000 stars, he bows down for the first time and says from his trembling heart, "La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah." This wasn't just the discovery of a city, it was the rediscovery of his soul. Watch the full story now, how buried secrets of an ancient civilization led a heart to Islam. Only on Deen in Minute. Don't miss it. Link in description. The wind howled across the ancient valley, a haunting melody that seemed to echo voices long forgotten. In the heart of the desert, where no map dared to draw a border, stood the remains of a civilization lost to the sands of time. For centuries, men had searched for it, some driven by greed, some by curiosity, but none had succeeded. And then came Julian Ward. Julian was only 32, but his name already shimmered through academic circles like a desert mirage. Raised in London among books and quiet evenings, he had always been different. While other boys played football, Julian devoured dusty volumes about Babylon, Mesopotamia, and the mysteries of Petra. His fascination wasn't with stones alone, but with the stories stones could tell. His journey began not out of faith, but of sheer obsession. An obscure 9th century manuscript had caught his attention, a scroll written by an unknown traveler who spoke of a magnificent city swallowed by a storm of divine wrath. Its towers turned to sand, its gates buried deep. The locals, the manuscript said, called it Al-Medina al-Samf, the Silent City. No one believed it existed, but Julian did. Funded by a small grant and driven by sleepless nights, he found himself under the blistering sun of Arabia, surrounded by a small team who shared his vision, or at least his pay. Days turned into weeks, and hope withered like an old parchment. Sandstorms ruined equipment, food supplies dwindled, and whispers began to circle among his team. We should leave. But Julian, thin from fatigue and with eyes sunken yet aflame, refused. Then came the morning that changed everything. At dawn, Julian wandered away from the camp, following an unnatural alignment of scattered stones. His boots crunched over centuries of neglect until, half buried in the sand, he saw it. A slab of black basalt, etched with a script unlike anything he'd ever seen. Heart pounding, he knelt, tracing the letters with trembling fingers. They were worn, eroded by wind and time, but clear enough to speak to him. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, in the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most compassionate. Julian froze. The words, though unfamiliar on his tongue, felt strangely comforting. But how could this be? This civilization predated Islam, he thought. Or had they survived into a time no historian had imagined? He called his team. They excavated feverishly, driven by awe and wonder. Slowly, the sand yielded its secret. Remnants of towering pillars, graceful arches, and inscriptions, some in Arabic, others in scripts Julian couldn't decipher. But always the same invocation appeared, repeated like a heartbeat. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. That night, Julian lay awake beneath a sky of 1,000 stars. The desert was silent, but inside him, a storm had begun. Who were these people, whose devotion endured even as their city fell to ruin? What power had given them such faith? As the days passed, the silent city revealed more. They found a courtyard, its walls still standing, adorned with verses that Julian's translator recognized as passages from Quran. The calligraphy flowed like water, speaking of mercy, compassion, and surrender to the will of the Almighty. The deeper Julian dug, the deeper he felt himself changing. This was no longer about fame or discovery. It was about truth, a truth older and greater than himself. One evening, Julian wandered alone through the ruins, running his hand over stones worn smooth by centuries of prayer. The sun set in a blaze of crimson and gold, and in the gathering twilight, he heard a voice, a whisper not carried by wind, but rising from somewhere deeper. "Are you listening?" it seemed to ask. He shivered. Was it madness, exhaustion, or something else? That night, Julian dreamed. In his vision, he stood amid the ruins as they once were, towers gleaming under moonlight, fountains bubbling in hidden courtyards, and the sound of the adhan, the call to prayer, echoing through the marble streets. He saw men and women, serene and humble, bowing in prayer. And then he saw the city fall, not to invaders, but to the relentless desert wind. Yet even as the walls crumbled, the words of the Quran endured, etched into stone, as if defying time itself. He awoke with tears streaming down his face. For the first time in his life, Julian prayed, not with words he knew, but with a heart laid bare. "Show me the truth," he whispered into the darkness, "even if it destroys everything I believed." In the days that followed, he buried himself in the Quranic inscriptions they had uncovered. The words spoke to him, not as a scholar, but as a man lost and seeking. They spoke of a God who is closer than one's jugular vein, of mercy that embraces even the deepest sin, of a purpose beyond wealth, beyond fame. One evening, Julian stood at the edge of the ruins, the wind lifting grains of sand like ancient prayers. His translator, Omar, a gentle man with kind eyes, approached. "You look troubled, Julian," Omar said softly. Julian hesitated, then asked, "Omar, do you ever wonder why these people held on to their faith even when their world failed?" Omar smiled sadly, "Because faith is not tied to walls or wealth, Julian. It lives in the heart, and the heart survives even when cities die." Julian turned away, fighting an ache in his chest. "I spent my life chasing stone and bone, but here, I feel like I've found something better." Omar placed a hand on his shoulder. "Sometimes, Allah buries signs not to hide them, but so the right heart can discover them." Julian felt something break inside him, a wall built by pride, doubt, and the arrogance of intellect. And from its ruins, a question rose like dawn. What if it's true? He began reading the Quran at night, by lamplight. At first, it was the historian in him, searching for context. But soon, the words moved beyond his mind, sinking into his soul. One verse struck him like thunder. Indeed, in the creation of the heavens and the earth, and the alternation of the night and the day, are signs for those of understanding. Quran 3:190. Julian had spent years studying ancient worlds, marveling at their ingenuity. But he had never asked, who created the laws that made such ingenuity possible? Who created the very minds that could imagine stone into art? At dawn, he walked into Omar's tent. His voice trembled. "Teach me to pray." Omar's eyes softened. "Are you sure, Julian?" "I don't know everything," Julian whispered. "But my heart is sure." Under the pale light of dawn, Omar showed him how to wash, how to stand, how to bow, and how to surrender. Julian's first prayer was clumsy, the words foreign, but when his forehead touched the earth, he felt something break and heal at once. It was as if the desert, silent for centuries, had whispered its secret into his soul. True peace lies not in discovery, but in submission. Word spread among his team. Some mocked, others watched in quiet respect. But Julian didn't care. The city had changed him forever. Days turned into weeks, and their work neared completion. They cataloged artifacts, photographed inscriptions, and prepared for the academic world that waited beyond the dunes. But Julian knew the real discovery was something no museum could display. On the last night, he sat atop a dune overlooking the silent city. The moon shone silver on broken arches and shattered walls, and Julian whispered words he never thought he'd say. La ilaha illallah, Mohammedur Rasulullah. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. In that moment, centuries fell away. He felt part of an unbroken chain stretching back through prophets, saints, and simple believers. Those who had loved and lost, suffered and hoped, all for the sake of the one. The next morning, they packed to leave. Julian turned back for a final glance. The ruins lay quiet under the rising sun, But he knew their silence was not emptiness, it was prayer. Back in London, Julian faced questions, doubt, and even scorn. A respected scholar turning Muslim, many couldn't understand. But he answered with patience, his faith growing stronger. He published his findings, but not as a story of lost wealth. Instead, he wrote of a civilization built on devotion, a people who understood that the true monument to faith isn't stone, but the human heart. Years later, Julian returned to the silent city, now under protection as a heritage site. Tourists came and went, marveling at the ruins. But Julian, older now and known as Yusuf, came not to marvel, but to pray. Standing among broken pillars, he recited verses he had once discovered as an outsider, now as a believer. The words echoed across the sand, carried by the same wind that had once buried them. Every soul shall taste death, and to us you shall be returned. Quran 29:57. In the hush of that timeless city, Julian, now Yusuf, understood that faith is not an artifact to be uncovered. It is the breath in every prayer, the hope in every heart, and the whisper of the eternal in the silence of the world. As the sun set, he whispered a prayer of gratitude for the ruins, for the wind, and for the God who had guided him not to stones, but to the truth that endures beyond stone. The silent city still lay half buried in the sands, but in Yusuf's heart, its secret had blossomed into something deathless, the light of Islam. And so, from the broken walls of a lost civilization, a man found what no historian could ever hope to discover: the peace of submission and a love for Allah deeper than the deepest ruin.